Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be taking a look at yet another Spawn miniseries, because 30 years ago, Todd McFarlane decided to publish two Spawn miniseries at the exact same time, because I'm pretty sure he just wanted to make my life more difficult. At least that's what I'm going with. Anyway, we're going to be talking today about Spawn Blood Feud #1. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in June of 1995, we can see here the cover is actually pretty solid in my opinion, done by Tony Daniel and Kevin Conrad. I really like the way that we've got Spawn featured up front on this throne of skulls with the moon and or sun potentially in the background with the Spawn symbol in the middle of it. That's a cool look. We notice though that Spawn seems really skinny and gaunt here, and we're going to find out that there's a very good reason for that when we look further into this story. Story, Alan Moore. Art, Tony Daniel, Kevin Conrad. Letters, Tom Orzechowski. Color, Todd Broker. The story starts out here on a rooftop of sorts in New York City, as there's a young, I don't know if they're a couple or just friends. They are having a discussion about the young girl's decision to become a vegetarian, and the young guy's kind of, crapping all over her for that, stating that her reasons for it don't make sense. She believes that it's wrong to eat animals. However, he brings up the valid point that she owns leather shoes and a leather jacket. And she's like, oh, well, I've got my faults, but it doesn't change my point that eating animals is wrong. He rebuttals, stating that it's all part of the food chain and that people are on top. And then they're suddenly interrupted when there's something that catches the girl's eye from behind, and she is suddenly attacked as we see a flash of blood, and the sheet that she was hanging on a clothesline is suddenly awash in crimson. The young man then throws his hands up, stating, oh God, no, please somebody help me, as we then suddenly see another splash of blood as his glasses go flying through the air. At that point, we are taken inside of the building where a middle-aged man comes out of his front door, stating, come on kids, what's all that commotion, as we see the door that goes out to the rooftop being broken in. The man is then suddenly horrified by what he sees as he goes back into his apartment. His wife saying, who is that? He then says, just give me the gun. She states that he's scaring her, but he says, just give me the gun. Suddenly, as they get ready for whatever it is they see, the door to their apartment is broken in. The man's wife and son both terrified. The man states, get away, as he opens fire, getting off 3 rounds before suddenly his hand is cut to ribbons as we see several of his fingers flying, totally ripped off of his body, the gun also flying through the air. His wife then screams, stay away from me, stay away, as the young boy looks on in terror, just screaming, mom. And then we see a cutaway to his Kermit the Frog plushie slashed to ribbons flying through the air, as it's presumed the worst has happened to this family. The issue then takes a weird turn where we're suddenly teleported into the depths of hell, where we see Spawn's costume, but it does not have Spawn inside of it. It's just sentiently operating on its own. Al Simmons actually states that he believes he's having a dream, as the costume narrates throughout this quote-unquote dream, stating that it's on the hunt as its sisters watch. It also states that it is a K7 Letha. Now, this is important because those of you who have been watching for a long period of time and have a decent memory may recall that all the way back in issue number 8 of Spawn, we found out that the designation for Spawn's costume is the K3 Mirlu, which is not what this thing calls itself. So that begs the question, does the K3 Mirlu then turn into the K7 Letha over a period of time? Or what has happened exactly here? And that's something we're going to have to keep wondering because it's not explained in this issue. The costume starts to talk about how it's on the hunt and it's hungry and lustful for blood, as it seems to be hunting a pack of demons. One of the demons runs off on its own, And the costume makes short work of singling this demon out, attacking it, and then going in for the kill as it plans to consume it. We even see that the costume's chest opens up as a mouth, as we see the two skulls that are up near the top of the chest. And under here, it's just opened up with teeth and a tongue, and it's apparently going to eat this demon whole. So we're to believe. The costume then continues to feed upon the demon as it takes its final bites. It states that its sisters then are, I guess, brought to life by the smell of blood and the kill, as we see multiple other costumes start to fly through the air, almost like bats in a way. We're not certain if these are K3 Mirlus. However, the costume acts as if these costumes are in fact weaker than itself. So perhaps, maybe, if the K7 Letha is the evolved form of the K3 Mirlu. Again, none of the questions that I'm bringing up are answered in this issue. And then suddenly Al awakens in the alleyways, surrounded by many of the homeless men who are actually quite worried about him. Al states, "How long was I out?" The men answer, "We're not sure. We just came up on you and your costume was going crazy. Your chains were all over the place. The cape was going nuts. We couldn't even get close to you." They then state that, they're kind of worried about their friend here. And Al says, not to worry about it. He'll handle it. But then one of the men states, even the skulls on your costume, they were going crazy, dude. We were actually really concerned about what's going on. But then Al, at this point, shouts in them, stating, "I said it's okay, it's fine, I'll deal with it," but then grabs his head, stating that he has a pounding headache. As he wanders off into the alleyways, the man then states, "Yeah, well, glad we could be of assistance, you jerk," kind of showing his displeasure at the fact that Spawn's, being really dismissive and almost hostile towards them, despite the fact that they were just concerned for the well-being of their friend. Also, I find it strange that Bobby is not depicted as being one of the men who was around, given that he's, without a doubt, the most prominently featured of all the men of the alleyways at this point in the story. So it seems as though he would have been here, given that he has the closest relationship with Spawn. Meanwhile, back at the building that we started this issue at, we see that Sam and Twitch have come to the crime scene to start their investigation of these gruesome murders, taking photographs, trying to figure out exactly what happened. Sam states that the whole attack took less than 30 seconds from the time that the first two victims were killed out on the rooftop to the time that the three victims in the apartment were killed, which is pretty inconceivable given the amount of damage and destruction that happened. And the two of them realize that something weird is afoot, and Sam's actually starting to get really tired of dealing with all this paranormal stuff and all these super beings. And Twitch even states that he believes that the commissioner is reaching his boiling point as well, as he's actually decided to bring in a freelance paranormal crime specialist to aid the police force in combating whatever it is they're up against here. Sam's not too hot on the idea of somebody else coming in to advise the department, especially when that person's not another police officer. But, Twitch is like, well, I don't think you should feel too threatened with your, incredible sensitive vulnerability and masculinity here at work. Sam, of course, picks up on the joke and the insult and then states, "How long is it exactly that the two of us have been working together? My pal, my friend." And Twitch tells Sam, "I believe today is actually our 9-year anniversary. Why don't I take a picture for the album?" As the two of them are getting close to finishing things up at the crime scene and heading back to the police station. Back in the alleyways, however, Spawn is starting to get very angry and agitated and is really starting to question what exactly is going on with his costume. Of course, his costume is now in its secondary form after the major transformation we saw after his defeat by the hands at the hands of the Redeemer. Spawn's kind of trying to figure out what's going on here. He's always kind of just accepted the costume up until this point, but now he seems rather upset by it. He starts to ask, do you have some kind of nervous system? Are you alive? What are you feeding on if you are? what are these spikes? Are they your teeth? What does the cape do? What are these chains? Are these some sort of limbs that you use? I want to know exactly what you are and why I can't be rid of you. Kind of just really boiling over and starting to really question what exactly is happening and trying to figure out what it all means that his costume underwent this major transformation and why it is that he's stuck with it. As Spawn continues to scream into the night, questioning everything about his costume and what's going on with him, he fails to notice that on one of the rooftops above, the homeless men of the alleyway are observing all of this and seem to be a little bit worried about what's going on with their friend and if in fact he's starting to lose grips on reality. Meanwhile, back at the police station, we see that there's a huge contingent of reporters all gathered outside as the new paranormal crime specialist is arriving. Though I find this part to be kind of weird that there would be this kind of media buzz about it, given that this sort of thing seems to be something that the police station would not be making public info and trying to generate a bunch of buzz about. They would probably more likely be trying to keep this under wraps. And as the man exits his car and starts towards the police station, several other officers clear the crowd in front of him, telling them all to, make way and that there's no pictures, no interviews. As we see the man named John Sansker enter the police station, the commissioner says, "I know you're pressed for time. We've already gathered all the officers in the conference room. Why don't you go there right away and start with the presentation?" As we see him walk out onto the stage and approach the podium as he's given his introduction by one of the officers. As John Sansker approaches the podium, he's observed by all of the officers in attendance, including Sam and Twitch. Sam stating, "Wow, would you get a look at this guy? He looks like some kind of bronze god." However, Twitch states, "Oh, come on, that's just cheap spray tan. I'm pretty sure it's the same brand I use." John then states that, he is here to address the supernatural beings and problems that the police force is now facing, and that the police may have different terms for them, young bloods, super freaks, but he prefers older labels such as Nosferatu and vampire, meaning that he actually believes that Spawn and perhaps some of the other superheroes throughout the Image universe are indeed vampiric in nature. He then begins with a slideshow showing that he's actually been tracking Spawn's movements for quite some time, stating that while Spawn seems to have appeared about 6 months ago in New York City, which I don't know if that's 6 months from the time that the police force first was made aware of Spawn's existence in New York, or 6 months from the very beginning of the series. That's not clearly stated. But he does state that he's been observing Spawn for a very long period of time now, as he brings up different photographs of him, stating that, he prefers the darkness, though he can be out in the sunlight as well. He also brings a point to the fact that Spawn seems to attract bats whenever he shows up, which is kind of funny that this is being brought into the actual lore here, when realistically that was probably just like an aesthetic touch that Todd was doing because he thought it looked cool. And then he also states that the creature, wears this very elaborate costume that's almost like a supernatural gang colors of sorts. Twitch finds this kind of ridiculous and states, "Wow, he's got jokes too." But then he's promptly told to shut up by Sam. But it is interesting to see John's take on all of this, as, he's kind of really laying it on pretty thick that Spawn is some kind of supernatural monster, which technically, I guess, is correct in the sense that he is a reanimated corpse from the depths of hell who made a deal with a devil or an archdemon of sorts to be brought back to the world of the living. But he's definitely not a vampire, as John is trying to paint him to be. As John Sansker continues his presentation, he brings up a slide of Spawn in the cemetery where his body, that of Al Simmons, is buried, as he's perched up on top of a crucifix. He then states correctly that he believes this is where Spawn's mortal body is buried, and then reveals to all of the police in attendance that he's quite certain that Spawn is in fact a resurrected being. Now, he's 100% right in assuming this. He then brings up a image of a close-up of Spawn's face that he says is putrid and rancid and decaying, which it is, and then states that, this creature is probably driven mad by the fact that it's been resurrected and lives in delusions of heroics and grandeur as a way of trying to deal with that pain, but that he knows exactly what this creature is and how to deal with it. Now, those of you who saw my video on Spawn number 32 know that John here is not exactly what he seems, or the way he's portraying himself to the police here is far from accurate. He's really quite the character and somewhat insane, even by the standards of characters here in Spawn, as we saw the way that he kidnapped and started torturing Curse, who is another character that might be a few sandwiches short of a picnic. He then states that he wants the police to start canvassing all the boroughs of New York and hand out the flyers where they make Spawn out to be an extra normal hazard because they don't want to scare them by stating that he's a vampire or a monster of sorts. However, given everything that's been going on since Spawn showed up here in New York City, and since he's made himself, known to the general populace, it seems likely that people are probably already a little bit wary of him, but that's not really the point here. They don't want to actually warn the public. What they want to do is lure Spawn out into their trap. And as we see, this plan starts to work as one of the discarded flyers makes its way to Spawn's alley as we see his cape slowly going over to pick one up. However, after reading the flyer, Spawn becomes enraged and screams out in the night, "Is this the thanks I get? After all I've done to try and help people, to try and protect people, they think I'm some kind of blood-sucking monster and they want to put a stake through my heart? Well, maybe this is it. Maybe I've had enough. Maybe I'm just going to let everything go to rot. Maybe I'm going to go and hide off somewhere and let people deal with their own problems." However, at this point, he grabs his head in pain as he's once again starting to feel the call of the costume, I guess. It's not really fully stated how this is happening, but he starts to feel himself losing consciousness as we see the narration of the K7 Letha once again come in, stating that it is the K7 Letha, the daughter of the 7th House of K, which also brings up the question, are the K3 Mirlus the daughters of the 3rd House of K? And if so, what the hell are the Houses of K? We don't know. However, Spawn does his best to try and fight the urge to lose consciousness as the drone of the narration from the costume gets louder and louder. He ends up losing his battle as we see him collapse in the middle of the alleyway in a heap, unconscious. We're then suddenly transported to another part of the city where we see a building, and inside of one of the rooms of this building are a few presumed ne'er-do-wells discussing what they plan to do with a large sum of money that they are now in possession of, and it's assumed that they somehow gain this through ill-gotten means, I suppose. Also, we once again see the wub-wub that we saw going down the page at the beginning of the book during the first attack. As the discussion continues, it's interrupted when something smashes through the window and attacks the ne'er-do-wells. One of them tries to pull a gun, however, he is immediately killed. The woman runs for her life, stating, "I'm getting out of here." One of the men, however, states, "But what about the money? We can't just leave it." When the man in the hat is also then presumably killed as we see the money flying through the air. We then see the woman and another man running down the hallway into the elevator, stating to the one behind them that he needs to hurry and get into the elevator so they can get away. He, however, foolishly decides to turn and pull his gun in an attempt to ward off whatever it is that's chasing the three of them. The two in the elevator decide that they can't hold the door open anymore as they see their friend cut down. and the door goes shut and they begin their descent towards the lobby. However, unfortunately for them, this is not necessarily a path to safety. We then see the doors to the elevator shaft spread open in a horrible sound as the two inside the elevator realize that the creature, I guess, is on top of the elevator as it rips it open and starts to rip the two of them apart. The door to the elevator then opens to two people who were in the lobby waiting for it as they're shocked by the horrible scene of carnage inside. However, they can't be shocked for long as they themselves are then attacked and ripped to shreds. Two other men in the lobby can't believe what they're seeing as one of the men near the door, or one of the men near the door, tries to escape with his girlfriend as the other man is paralyzed in fear and is ripped apart along with the man trying to get his girlfriend to safety, who, as she's watching this, screams, you told me this was a safe place. However, she then is presumably killed as we see the glass door that she was behind shatter and more blood and a scream, and then nothing but just a wall of blood. I do find it strange, though, that the lobby of this building doesn't seem to match the exterior appearance of it, and it does seem that this was perhaps a nicer, more upscale apartment, which also begs the question, what were these street level hoods all doing up at the top floor, after having stolen or, I don't know, somehow gotten their hands on all that money? A lot of this part doesn't really seem to make much sense, and I can't imagine we're going to get much explanation as to what all of this was about. We definitely don't get it in this issue, that's for sure. We're then suddenly teleported back to hell, presumably, as we are once again in the dream state, maybe, that we saw earlier in the book, where the K7 Letha costume is now flying over the dead trees of a valley as it looks down upon its sisters sitting in their beautiful skull nest, as it calls them. They seem to be content as they look out over the fields of discarded body parts that they didn't want to feast upon. And the costume continues to fly along, looking down underneath it, as it continues to ramble on about, how it feels and how much it enjoys being itself and how content it is as it looks upon the two suns overhead, but looks into those suns as the light begins to get brighter and brighter. We see that suddenly the hands are no longer just the empty sleeves of the costume, but are full figured and muscular, when we suddenly realize that we're back to the real world where Spawn has awakened to bright lights and a large crowd and doesn't really seem to know what the heck is going on. Unfortunately for Spawn, once he gets his bearings and fully comes to, he realizes that he's covered in blood and is surrounded by police officers with their guns drawn and a trail of bodies that leads back to presumably the same building that we just saw in the previous sequence, as he realizes that the police believe that he's the one responsible for these murders, and he very well may be, as far as he knows, as he was unconscious up until just a few moments ago, and now he seems to have gone on a killing spree in this unconscious state as we reach the end of the story of this issue. On the next page, we see image info. That's more of the same, your standard fare of what's going on with Image Comics and upcoming issues. Nothing to see here. We then get to the Image fan art section, which is always fun to see fan-submitted artwork getting published in these books. Most everything in this issue is Spawn-related, except for these two down here. We have one of the Max, and this one here of Nightmare. For those of you who don't know much about Nightmare, don't feel bad. He didn't last very long. This is a Rob Liefeld character who is very similar in his origin to the Punisher, and I don't have a whole lot of issues of Nightmare, and I don't think there really are a whole lot of issues of Nightmare. I think I've got like 4, maybe 5 of them, and I'll probably make videos on those eventually, but it's not like on my top list of priorities to get to. We then surprisingly reach the spawning ground, and I say surprisingly just for the fact that I was kind of shocked to see that there was a spawning ground in an issue of a mini-series. Up until this point, we had only seen the spawning ground appear in the mainline ongoing Spawn series, never in one of the miniseries. So it was kind of shocking to turn the page and see this. And this is a full-fledged spawning ground. A lot of letters. Some of them, well, most of them critical. One of them really is kind of odd. Well, I shouldn't say it's odd. It's just someone kind of complaining about the direction that Todd is taking the story in. They don't really care for it and wish that he would get back to the way things were before, and how he feels like Todd's, not focusing enough on, a standard hero type of story. But then, Todd's like, hey, that was never really my intent. And those first, 5 to 10 issues were really more about setting up the world for the character. And I'm now kind of getting more into the meat and potatoes of where I wanted to go with this story. And, stick with it. I think you'll like it. But, this just kind of shows the challenges of trying to make a property with mass market appeal. You're always going to alienate some people. Then you get another letter where someone is complaining about how they believe that the quality of the comics has gone down, and that it's because Todd has too many irons in the fire, and that he's trying to do too much outside of the comic book, and believes that Todd should just go back to focusing solely on the comic book and nothing else, which I understand the sentiment, but it's kind of a ridiculous take. And to, Todd's credit, that reader did bring up the fact in their letter that they were only 13. So Todd does keep the kid gloves on a little bit when he addresses them, and really just tries to explain that, his goal for Spawn was to make him a more household name and not just a character that only comic book readers know about. And in order to do that, he needed to get Spawn out into a more, mass media world with the toys, with the upcoming movie deal that he's working on, and, trying to actually make sure that people who don't read comics still know the name Spawn and know who that character is. And he brings up, the idea that, you could make this same argument about characters like Spider-Man and Batman and Superman. These are household names. People know who these characters are. They're not just comic book fans. And it's understandable that he would want to get to that point with this character. And then there's one person who writes in and basically chastises all the people who were complaining about the lack of availability for the toys that Todd is producing and how difficult it is to find them and all this sort of thing. And, Todd actually pushes back on that a little bit. He's like, listen, your points are valid in the sense that I have no control over, retailer going into a place like Target and buying every toy that's on the shelf and then taking it to their store and marking them all up 20%. But at the same time, these people may be in an area where they don't have tons of big box retailers all around that they can go all over town and find everything. And, if they can't find it at their local Walmart, then they're just kind of out of luck. And then their only other option is to potentially go and pay, 20% markup, 50% markup, 100% markup at the town's local comic book store, which that sucks as well. So, while Todd, can't really do anything to stop resellers from marking up his product and making it difficult for collectors to get it, he also is cognizant of the frustration that those collectors are expressing in his letter section. And, I applaud him for at least, understanding what they're dealing with and trying to meet them halfway in, accepting their frustrations and doing what he can to try and address them the best that he can. We then, just as we saw in the Violator miniseries, get 2 pages of behind-the-scenes storyboards from Alan Moore. He included these with the script that he sent to Tony Daniel as kind of basically a framework of the way he thought that the pages should be kind of laid out to tell the story correctly according to the vision that he saw in the script. Now, of course, Tony has the ability to just do whatever he wants, but surprisingly enough, he actually stuck with quite a few of Alan's suggestions and used some of these directly for the layouts and ultimately the final product that he put out for publication, which is pretty interesting to see. Alan Moore is not exactly regarded as, a top level artist of any kind. And it is cool to see that the artist is taking his notes to heart when he draws these things out and kind of utilizing these storyboards as a framework for the final product that he sends off to print. We then get an advertisement for the Violator vs. Bad Rock miniseries. As of recording this, I am currently halfway through this miniseries, and if you'd like to know more about it, you can check out both of the episodes I've recorded so far in my Spawn miniseries playlist. And on the final, well, I guess not final page, reverse inside cover, we see an advertisement for Wildcats number 21, which is a new team, a new mission, a new writer, and a new artist in Alan Moore as the writer and Travis Charest, maybe is how you say that, as the artist. Now, as of recording this, I am very far away from issue number 21 of Wildcats, so I am nowhere close to dealing with the story point that's being brought up in this advertisement. However, if you would like to know more about Wildcats, you can check out all my episodes on that in my Wildcats playlist. And that was Spawn Blood Feud number 1. And overall, I'm not super fond of this book. It had been, I want to say, somewhere between 15 and 20 years, I think, since I read this book. And I remembered before I went back to read it for this episode that I didn't have a whole lot of fondness for this miniseries. And that opinion has not really changed. I don't feel like this miniseries, so far at least, adds a whole lot to the Spawn narrative. It really feels like Alan Moore is trying to create a mystery, but kind of goes too far with it to the point where you're just kind of clueless as to what's going on. There's a difference between creating a mystery and a mess. And when you create a mystery, you create intrigue and suspense and a desire to know more about what's going on. But when you create a mess, it's kind of more convoluted to the point where it's somewhat difficult to follow, and you're not able to get immersed enough in the story to want to find out more. And I kind of feel like that's sort of what's going on with Blood Feud, especially with the way that the dream sequences work and the costumes speaking in these weird, cryptic diatribes that kind of feel like they go nowhere. And the whole time you're just scratching your head trying to figure out what exactly is going on. And, okay, we have the introduction of this new mysterious character, John Sansker, but the book barely touches on him at all. And, we're led to believe that Spawn might be out there just committing these horrible atrocities and murdering people while he's unconscious in this dream state, but we have no idea if that's what's actually happening. And we also get this point where Spawn is now becoming adversarial towards his costume, whereas prior to this, we had seen him have a more reverent fondness for the costume, almost as if he cared about it in like a loving, familial way. And now all of a sudden that's gone. There's a lot of stuff going on in this issue, and I feel like a lot of it is just clashing story points that are creating, not necessarily plot holes, but just weird, almost, I don't know what the word for it is, just confusion, I guess is the best way I can put it. And I don't know, it just feels like it misses the mark. But then again, these are just my opinions, and your opinions may be completely different. You might think that this issue is amazing and love this miniseries. And if that's the case, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.